Welcome to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronymus. Laura Kortner is our executive producer, and Vern Anderson, our engineer. Adventures of the world push civilizations from the ancient past by vital inspection in the present into our world's future. One such explorer, Alex Chionetti, joins us this hour for a discussion about his 30-year odyssey from 1978 until 2018 in exploring the legends, the myths, the facts, and first-hand knowledge of his own from exploring the Taos Caves complex in the Amazon rainforest of Ecuador. His book, Mysteries of the Taos Caves, The Lost Civilization from Where the Andes Meet the Amazon, a Bear & Company 2019 release, tells that 30-year adventure. Deep inside these caves, there are said to be tunnels stretching thousands of miles, connecting the Americas. But as the Shuar people who guard them believe, there are both curses and treasures held within. Sharing his meetings with other historic adventurers who focused on these very secret caves, Chionetti separates out what may be fact from fiction. Are these caves connected to lost civilizations of great advancement? Did they leave behind metal plates with writings to tell us of their existence? Are these caves connected to ancient aliens and ancient astronauts? Is there really an underground route between the Rocky Mountains to Patagonia? Alex Chionetti is an award-winning journalist, explorer, and filmmaker. He is credited with discovering 2 lost cities in the Andean region. He has been a consulting producer for several seasons of Ancient Aliens, and his own documentaries have been broadcast on Fox, NBC, A&E, and other international networks. I hope you'll join us both for an exploration of intrigue, desire to know the truth, and an effort to solve a great ancient enigma. Thank you so much for joining us, Alex.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
Why don't we start? Yes, it's a pleasure. Let's start with your own inclination to be an explorer. When did you know that this was the kind of life you would lead?
I don't know. It's a process of many years. When I was a child, I was brought by my parents to see this kind of rock carving, rock paintings in my country, in kind of these travels we were doing during the summers, and that paintings of these lost Indian who were totally exterminated, but remain in this one of the greatest mural paintings in South America, in the Cerro Colorado, and that fascinated my interest. But that connect also with star maps, with archaeoastronomy, and these Indians, they were very advanced and were attract the interest of writers and artists, and I started to kind of opening the way. I come from a family of artists and philosophers and things, but I always was sensitive to know the origin of mankind and the reality, and all the connection between science and art was a trigger. I always had been that curiosity, and to know more.
And how did you get involved with this particular mystery of the Taos Caves in Ecuador? And it's spelled Tayos for those in the audience.
Yeah, Taos. Yeah, Taos is the name of the birds, oil birds who live in these caves, who are crossing all the American continent. When I started 40 years ago, when I wrote my first book, Parallel Worlds, and I won this essay, a personal, was a kind of a competition, and I won this literary competition, but that genre was called the Realismo Fantástico, fantastic realism. And this magazine was a sponsor also some studies related, and in the book I talk about extraterrestrials. One of the first part of the book was parallel worlds, interterrestrial parallel worlds. We're talking about extraterrestrial, interterrestrial, and more the parallel world of the mind, of the mysteries of the mind. And I know always thought that it's all interconnected, the inner and the outer space, and coming back from that place of the artists, the Indians, they live in caves. And they were also artists, the Comechingones tribe, I was mentioning for my first interest. And that was one of the chapters of the book, but also another chapter I wrote about an expedition to Ecuador made by an Argentinian speleologist, Julio Goyen Aguado, who was already before that expedition, he was exploring caves in Argentina, the Argentinian Andes. And he connected that with the lost civilization of the Pacific, Lemuria, Mu, and another with more also folkloric tales of the Andes. And I remember through a friend of mine, he called me, or he came to visit, and he said, "Oh, Mr. Aguado want to meet you, but you wrote about him in your book." And my book was an early bird, and I was very young when I wrote, and I won that competition, and was published as a book. And I went to see him, and I said, he started to tell me, "Oh, I went to an expedition a few years ago to this cave, and I was escort of the astronaut Neil Armstrong."
Yeah, Neil Armstrong. That was fascinating.
Yeah, and it's knew Neil Armstrong was not only interested in the space, but he was interested in explore our world, the inner space. But Julio we turned friends immediately, and under his mentorship, he sent me to have my first kind of descending in a cave in the very cold Andes between Argentina and Chile, and kind of hundreds of meters in a cave called the Cave of Witches. It was a famous cave, a karst cave in the heart of the Argentinian Andes, no? And that was, but after I discovered his speleological group was not only exploring the geological aspect, was also almost an inner work group, an initiation. And the initiation was going to the wound of the earth, going to the deep. And Julio, who was a fascinating person, and he was part of another tradition who connect also with his Basque ancestors. And the other Basque was a fantastic researcher and political figure and diplomatic foreign office guy and writer and novelist and researcher, and also from the Basque country. Julio was the Basque country, but he came in the early age to Argentina. But the other was Florencio de Basaldúa, and Florencio de Basaldúa also connect the ancient world. He was really reconstructing the origin of man and mankind, and he was talking about the red race, and he was talking about in the Andes was a big key, a big clue to find the origin of the species, the origin of the human races. And in that, Julio also considered there were below the end was an advanced civilization who were very spiritual, and he was guiding our past and our future.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting because you talk about the Shuar people of Ecuador who guard these caves, and they also believe that this world is sort of a direction that we're headed to the real world. This isn't really the real world. This is just a stepping stone till we get to the spiritual world. And so the caves have a lot to say about both treasure and curses. And you talk about that in your book. Talk to us a bit about what the Shuar people believe and how they treated you and why it's so difficult. It's an enigmatic place to go. I mean, the lengths you had to go through to get permits and to do it, and that you almost died on your third try, and we'll talk about that. But tell us about the Shuar people.
Well, the Shuar people, this is the Indian group, used to be called the Jibaros. If you remember the movies from the 50s and the Hollywood adventure from the time of Gene of the Jungle and Tarzan, and the Jibaros are only, they live between Peru and Ecuador. They don't have boundaries, don't have borders, but there are kind of, we could say there are Amazonian tree people who supposed to come from the east, more from the area of Brazil and Amazonia, the eastern oriental side, and they immigrate to west, and they settle in these kind of Amazonian sources, rivers. It's Mesopotamia of rivers, between the Sierra, the high Andes, and the beginning of the Amazonian range.
So,
but they were totally different. They're totally different of all the other ethnias, and they are kind of still very kind of primitive in the sense they are very connected with nature, with the ancestral tradition of Arutam, who is the god. And for them, it's not good and evil. It's a kind of very kind of agnostic, but gnostic in the same way, position regarding with nature. It's a kind of the innocence of the primitive man is that, and that connection with the folds and the trees and the hallucinogenic plants bring them to have almost live in alter the state of different reality, and not only with healing plants, but also in this society, and what you have the kind of different levels of clans, on different type of approach of family values and interaction with other kind of people. And the Shuars, also their group at Shuar and Shuar are the main groups. For many years they resist the evangelization of the Christian fathers, Catholic and the Christian Salesian fathers, who they die by flies for hundreds of years trying to evangelize the Jibaros. And the Jibaros were nomadic, but also they established settlements. They never developed any kind of scripture. That is, we come to the story of the metal plates, who are different.
Well, and that's a pretty critical part of the story. I mean, what's so interesting is you talk about Von Daniken, you talk about your mentor, Julio Aguardo, Father Crespi. I mean, these are all people that to any esotericist, if you start reading back about, as you mentioned, Lemuria or Mu or Atlantis or what has happened to these great, highly developed civilizations, and people may argue as to where there's remnants, but one of the consistent themes is in the Amazonian area. So what did Father Crespi have to add to this extraordinary story? And who was he?
I know you were going there with the Father Crespi. And yes, and I had been spending, I have a very important document of the Father Crespi, which I lost and misplaced between my movings and folders, and I cannot find it. And it's very fundamental for my next the sequel of my book.
Well, may you find it, or your dreams tell you where it is.
Yes, I think I will have to back to the jungle and take some kind of
ayahuasca. You know, it's interesting.
No. There are other more powerful. I used to work with that in my first expeditions.
Well, look, we're going to take a little break. We'll come back, and then you can tell us about these, some of what is rumored to be in these caves, including what Father Crespi had collected over years, which are these metal plates that presumably are part of an ancient history. If you're just joining us, our guest is Alex Chionetti. His name is spelled Chionettti, and you can find him on Facebook. His book is Mysteries of the Taos Caves, Tayos, The Lost Civilizations Where the Andes Meet the Amazon, a Bear & Company 2019 release.
My name is Lee Elders. I'm the author of Expeditions, Gold Shaman, and Green Fire. It's a true adventure about my journeys into Ecuador during the 60s in search for a lost emerald mine. I want to thank Dr. Zoe Hieronymus and 21st Century Radio for allowing me the opportunity to come forward with this interesting story. It is a true story. You want to see the photographs, some of them in color, go to my website, www.leeelders.com. The website gives you excerpts on the book, but the main thing I enjoy about what I'm hearing is I put the reader right into the adventure. Dr. Zoe Hieronymus, 21st Century Radio is the way to go.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Our guest is Alex Chionetti. His book, Mysteries of the Taos Caves, The Lost Civilizations Where the Andes Meet the Amazon, a Bear & Company 2019 release. So we left off at the last break, Alex, with a little teaser about Father Crespi. Who was Father Crespi? I know he passed away in 1982 or so.
Right, no, the teaser was about Lee Elders, but it's funny, I'm trying to get his book.
Oh, it's a wonderful book.
I know Lee. I met a couple of times him and his wife, and I know he wrote this book, and he met Father Crespi.
Yes, exactly.
I couldn't met Father Crespi, but when I went the first time to Ecuador, he already passed, and he was already senile, but yeah.
Yeah, well, Lee's book is excellent.
I know the story of Elders, too, and he spent years exploring.
Yes, it's all you explorers, I have to tell you, it's my favorite genre. I do a lot of different things in radio, and I have over the decades. But explorers interest me more than any other group of people because you have a tenacity, you have a courage, you have an imagination. Generally, there's a humility that is involved or you're not going to get where you're going. And there's this tenacity that goes from decade to decade to decade, like your life has, 30 years of exploring this one location on planet Earth because you believe, like others before you and probably after you, that it holds the keys to humanity on planet Earth. So Father Crespi again, and these supposedly, important metal library, as it's referred to.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, Father Crespi was a very interesting, colorful guy. He was sent by the Salesian Order to Ecuador, what was the warfare. He's supposed to collect kind of samples of the natural war for this kind of warfare in the 20s. But he got fascinated and he decided to remain. And Crespi was a priest, but also he was interested in art and also in film. He's the first one in history who made films about the Jibaros and the Shuars. And thanks God that film preserved, and also he discovered a very important region as the Pongo of Manseriche, what is not only one of the sources of the Amazon, but the Marañón River, very important river connect with the Amazon. And he filmed all that expedition. And I hope in the near future somebody is going to do the restoration of that film. And looking forward. But Crespi, he was a very kind of Renaissance guy in the 20th century, in the 1920s. And he started to be friend with the Indians in his parochial lands, and not only making the function of a priest, but also researching all the sides of the etnias of the Jibaros and Achuars, and all the region of Cuenca, the Azuay, Cañar. The Cañar is in Indians too, and he started to collect, and he created a museum. He created a cinematheque too, and a school. He was a founder of a famous school today in Cuenca called Maria Auxiliadora, who unfortunately the museum he created catching fire, but also the state, the government bought his collection when he was getting senile, and the Salesian Order, they didn't really respect too much him. They considered him kind of a loony, but he was collecting pieces, and the strange things, many of the pieces, they represent cultures of all over the world. And said, we know there are many hoaxes, but there are others that are not hoaxes. And the state, now the Central Bank of Ecuador, pay a fortune for his collection. Not really a fortune, but enough to take over from the Salesian order. No matter, there remain some, but they call tin and cans and from different kind of layers of time and artisans who were carving. We know many people were kind of bringing these kind of replicas, this time of kind of copies, a lot of copies, and take from books.
Right.
Some they were very silly, and they were kind of almost Baroque style, naive style, and you could see. But also there are some collections and giant metal sheets. They were also in gold, and the theory of this kind of people, neighbors, who were trying to please the father in his collection thing and make some money too.
Right.
But Father Crespi pulled his pocket and give some kind of money.
But what do you think about the authentic ones, not just the imitations and those trying to make money or please him?
The authentics, not too long ago, when I was doing my expeditions, I really explored the museum, and I have access to all the collection of the central bank, and I recorded in photos and videos. And also he have a giant collection of paintings, a pinacothèque, they're amazing. And some they were more replicas, other from the kind of the Cusqueña school. But there was a very prestigious school of artists in the 1600s. Between Peru, between Cusco and Quito, no? And all along the Andes, and many of the religious groups, Catholic groups, Dominicans and Franciscans and Jesuits, they have this kind of artisan art craft things, and one was painting. And they make replicas too.
Right.
But Crespi received also that. There was a theory what Lee Elders and Wendell Stevens trying to associate Crespi with the Nazis, and he got a connection. That was totally absurd, no? Mm-hmm. Saying the Nazis, where they pillage and they steal they were stealing in the 40s the art. They were exporting in submarines to the Equatorian coast.
But when you traveled to the caves, did you find any of this kind of material, or did Crespi himself say some of it came from the Taos caves?
No. If you read in my book, I said many of the Crespi collection come from another province of Ecuador.
Right, I read that.
This province of Ecuador have a lot of burial sites with gravestones, ceramics, and some metals with inscriptions in Phoenician language.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and you have this Sumerian, Babylonian type of scripture in some of the caves. And another official archaeologist from South America, who was also a Salesian, who reviewed, and he was friend with Father Crespi, the Father Molina. He was a very good collector of stones, and he explored, and he found many inscriptions, too, in the graves of the Cañari Indian things. That is what is one of my conclusions. But
yeah,
in the official collection of Crespi, we found many kind of a stone with inscription and ceramics, which we cannot explain. Also, many lost metal scrolls they disappeared. Some people stole it. They brought it to Germany, and I was not going to give names, but
right.
Yeah, one of the stelas with the Phoenician scripture were also you found in the Cañari Indians.
So basically, it's part of the legacy of the ancient cultures and civilizations that we can still find remnants of in Ecuador and in the Andean civilizations
in Peru.
In general.
Yeah, that was my search, and my search who started in the Andes, follow the traditions after and before the flood and the deluge. There were sites what these ancient cultures decide to preserve from the flood and from the previous catastrophes.
Right.
Their heritage.
Right.
And the way to preserve is you have the stone and the metals, no? They use metal, but in the Andes they were very advanced in the metal 3,000, 4,000 years ago in Peru, but the gold was not very used by the ancestor of the Shuar and the Chor Indians, as according to my friend, the late Dr. Lederberger Crespo. She told me, said, "What? You don't have any kind of anthropological kind of viability with the lost treasure and metal sheets, but the Shuars didn't care about." And I interviewed many of the elders of the Shuar, and it's true. They remember they used to hang up some kind of mirrors and pieces of metals in the trees, but only that. The only few people, few groups, they know about the lost libraries.
Right.
And
do you have it?
This
Do you
is a
have
tradition
a notion?
you found in Bolivia and in Peru, along the Andes. And the Jesuits hide many things about that, but also I found some documents about another collection more toward the Titicaca Lake area and connected with the Tiahuanaco culture. But as the Jesuits, they spent almost 200 years, they have control of many things, and they have to report. And I know the Vatican still have many things hidden there.
Yeah.
About
and we find
the
that.
Crespi story too. Yes. But for me, it's a different thing. I don't. The thing with Crespi started with Erich von Däniken in the 70s, and von Däniken used that photos of the collection of Crespi to support his kind of embellishment of the story. No?
Right.
And he said he had to prove to his publishers. I found evidence of the Tajos, but the story of the Tajos, they were different explorers, but the more important was Janos Morix, who was the close partner of my friend Julio Goyen. That is, I get involved with the story directly.
And Juan Morris is...
I am one of the last of that chain of command.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Juan was the Hungarian-born man, right? Who's given general credit for discovering the caves.
Another Renaissance man, Hungarian with a kind of a strange past. We don't know if he was with the Hungarians or he was with the Nazis in that time. But he immigrated to Argentina in the 50s. There are many. Unfortunately, the Hungarian historians didn't really found a lot of information, but many anthropologists and intellectuals of Hungary and linguistics, they follow some of the discoveries of Morix.
Well, he believed that ancient aliens assisted the South American civilizations?
No.
He did not. That was what von Däniken said.
Yeah, he talked about that. No, he talked about that. He was open.
Yeah, open to the idea.
Yeah, but he Morix is a generation older than Erich von Däniken.
Of course.
And that movement. Von Däniken was not the first one, neither.
No, of course not.
Yeah, it was George Hunt Williamson, who was an American pioneer in this. And Hunt Williamson was talking about the ancient astronaut theory in the 50s.
Yeah, exactly. And there's people in the 1600s. I mean, there's people from all over the world in different time centuries who have spoken about
Europe too. Yeah.
And the native traditions around the world speak to off-planet elders, whether that's the Zulus or the Hindis or the Buddhists or the Amerindians. But there was also a Scotsman, Stanley Hall. You mentioned the Mormons, Neil Armstrong. I mean, there's been a lot of interest in these caves. And do you think, from what you saw, and we have to take another break, but do you think there really was or still is this connection from the Rocky Mountains to Patagonia?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You do?
It's some connection.
Yeah. Okay, we'll be...
not totally kind of a continuation when cave from state to state, but you have caves, as in many American states, with one simple cave have 500 600 miles.
Right,
Only one
exactly.
cave.
Exactly. And when you think about, ice ages and catastrophe above ground, caves were how humans and other bipedals and others survived. So the caves were really so much a historic part of our civilization planet-wide and remain today, those that can still be found. I think that's one of the things that draws us back to them over and over and over again. Our guest is Alex Chionetti, Chionetti. You can find him on Facebook. His book, Mysteries of the Taos Caves, spelled Tayos, The Lost Civilizations Where the Andes Meet the Amazon, a Bear & Company 2019 release.
This is Gary A. David from the OrionZone.com, bringing you Hopi Star knowledge of northern Arizona. You are listening to Zohara Hieronymus on 21st Century Radio.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Alex Chionetti is our guest. You can find him online on Facebook, Chionetti. Don't forget, all links to all of our guests are on our 21st21st centuryradio.com and zoharaonline.com. So, Alex, I want to come back to your own life and that you've devoted 30 years to this search. You got there. You were able to have several explorations. Did you achieve what you wanted to achieve?
In certain ways, I achieved after so many years trying to get to the main cave, the mother cathedral cave of the Jibaro Nation, who was the cave of Tajos of the Cuangos River, where my friend Julio descended with Stanley Hall and Neil Armstrong in 1976. That was my goal, and I took 6 months, but before that, 6 months between in and out of the jungle with everybody was kind of against of all odds, as I didn't have any support of my own crew, of all my team, and they abandoned me a couple of times. But in the last moment, also my guide, who already abandoned me months before, I make a mistake to use it in the last expedition again, and also he repeated the same thing. But in the moment I was giving up, my team was small in the last months, and I said, I'm not going to live in Ecuador until I achieve what I was waiting for 20 years. The problem is I started very young with this, no matter I was kind of close and with Goyen Aguado. I tried many times, but that area was always in war, in constant political neighbor war between Peru and Ecuador. The area was high with a lot of mines, landmines, for the 80s and the 90s. That took me until my first expedition in 2006, 2007 to reach the goal. And in the last moment, my team also, who was the special forces of the police, they don't want to go after we cross several rivers and bridges. And we have threats. I said, I'm going myself. And when I was walking, they come after me and they said, no, we cannot abandon you.
Thankfully.
And I reached the goal, but it's without them, so I couldn't really descend to the shaft, to the cave. Is 80 meters, and you need a special climbing gear, and the only access. The other caves, also there are many other caves connected with the story of Tajos. You could see in my book, this called the Pastaza expeditions, the Chumbitajos, who are also, I discovered some kind of new evidence of some kind of constructions, kind of similar statues or figures. You cannot determine totally if they are natural formation or artificial. For me, they're artificial, but previous I was researching for 30 years other sites in the Andes where you found very advanced techniques of carving the rocks. And we know the Incas and the pre-Incas, they mastered that technique. And you could have, forget Machu Picchu, forget Ollantaytambo, Pisac. There are many other 100,000 of sites who prove this lost technology. But I was applying and following some elements Julio couldn't research about some doors and tunnels and constructions inside of the Cuangos caves. That brought me to prove that theory, trying to also see with my eyes what my previous friends, explorers, they couldn't really determine. I know, and I found that evidence. I achieved to at least prove for myself. I don't care about the dogmatic. I don't care about the official archaeology anymore.
Uh-huh.
And but it's kind of, archaeology is always digging the same thing, and they don't have really open mind.
Well, and you talk about the journey for yourself as an initiation. You shared that with us earlier. And on your third expedition, when your whole expedition could have been killed and all of you could have died, you didn't. But you said that you found yourself. That was sort of like the punchline of, and that's one of the things I found about explorers. We as humans go in looking for something that's material, that might give, notion to something ancient, but the process changes the person themselves doing the exploring.
Yes, of course. Yeah, during that 6 months, and in the first, and the other much more in the second and the third had been. But that initiation started many years before, when I was a teenager and I started to explore the other caves, as the one I mentioned in the high Andes. No? And also the other important interconnection was the Marcahuasi Plateau, what discovered by Daniel Russo, what I consider also a follower, and he was my mentor, and I followed his work of exploration. And he considered also that in that part of the Peruvian Andes was a reservoir of lost scrolls, non-metal, but in different type of more organic material. Mm-hmm. And we did also expedition looking for that epicenter. We found a kind of a graveyard, a tomb. Unfortunately, it was destroyed by the landslide when after we spent a couple of years excavating.
And another interesting part about your work and what I have found with other explorers is the way in which dreams really showed you what to do or not to do. You credit a dream of a shaman the night before you began your journey, and then another dream that affected you so deeply. Yes.
Yeah, well, it's that shaman was one of the, before the experience at the last stage when I was abandoned by my team, in the way we have to cross the second bridge, this shaman who dreamed on me and I dreamed of him,
right.
he guided me, and he was the help me to negotiate crossing to the other side of the river, as was crossing for find a sense of my life. I was crossing to my life and to my possible death. And that is the Amazon for you, as many other things. And also when you are a climber going to the Everest, you cross that line, but you realize yourself when you conquer, but it's conquers also your inner self, and against the fear. But in the last part, when we were coming from the Cuangos, we were ambushes and get the prisoners and release, and finally we have to hide and escape of the middle of the night, as I didn't want any kind of violence affecting families or other things. But the readers could read that part in one of the chapters, who was all the ordeal to survive and have to be chased as kind of in Indiana Jones.
Yeah. I mean, the book is...
when it was happening, I said, well, no, I don't want to be in that category. Kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah, but now any people, after I pay the floor ride, after my story, I try to kind of bring the area as they could be more open to the tourists and to adventure tourists. And now any tourists could go, including television crews. They have been going and stealing my concept too now, and it's not. They have a very easy way.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's how it is. The one who goes first through the path pays the price for everybody after them. Do you plan to, are there other places you want to search or look for lost treasure or something else pulling at your soul to go, this is what I have to do?
Yes, I have another locations connected with the inner subterranean war, and not only in Ecuador, but in other countries too. But also always in South America. But I'm trying to back to Tajos with some other clues. But the system have more 150 caves, and still the lost kind of treasure is never show up, and that is another story I explain in my book about why the reasons of the story. But some people reject the story. Say, well, why the more important archaeological discovery? For example, I just was with one of the curator of the Dead Sea Scrolls, kind of manuscript scrolls, and that is the more important archaeological find in history. But that not only report the cultural, but the spiritual, the very spiritual kind of tradition of mankind connected with the Christianity, with the origin of the Christ and Jesus. But beyond that, all the biblical story. But we have that in the Middle East, but in America there are all these reservoirs of previous knowledge, and we found too little, no? But we don't have enough exploration. It's a big puzzle, but the lost metal library of Tajos is kind of connect with that. That thing could be so important when we found it, so important as the Dead Sea Scrolls, from my point of view.
Right, and all of them talk to us about past civilizations that were highly advanced, and if not physically, spiritually, and that there was a much greater understanding about our purpose here on planet Earth and what we're here to do.
Yes, the Incas and the Parincas didn't leave any writing system as we could really reconstruct. But it's only the stones survive, no? And that is it. Yeah.
Well,
the
and
stone, the caves, the tunnels, some impossible architectural and monuments. There are many others in the middle of the jungle. Now with the LIDAR system it's more easy. But all my generation, we use the machete to go through.
Exactly. And not only that, now there's technologies that can look underground and Google Maps and all kinds of things that you can look at from space to see things that otherwise you couldn't see unless you got an airplane and flew over it. So
right. Well, universities and people and the power system could have other skills we don't have.
Yeah.
We are not associated with universities, and now the universities, they claim all these discoveries, but still, fortunately, all these sites are covered by jungle, and it's going to take hundreds of years to clean the green cover, until we found more response, more answers.
Well, that's why it's so nice that you work as, with Ancient Aliens and some of these other History Channel. I mean, I can remember 30 years, there was none of this on television. And when Bob and I would do shows, people thought it was so odd. And now it's almost commonplace in the sense that people are open to the ancient alien theory, to looking at the presence of off-planet beings, of understanding that even our ancient indigenous traditions that exist today still speak to elders from the Pleiades and Sirius and Lyra, that we still have a relationship to off-planet civilizations of which we are a remnant.
Yes, now, it's an overture also for the new generations, and I am happy, no? In my generation, yes, we have a few books and a few magazines. Now we have in the visual spectrum, in the media, online and in television, we have the real stuff.
Does that make you think that we're about to actually come to a better understanding as a humanity?
Yes, I think it's more opening that they don't really, when many things are happening, they don't really laugh too much about our kind of Don Quixote adventures.
Yeah.
The thing is, now we are not, it's different things. It's a different kind of perspective, but it's more hope. And still, no matter with all the technology, it's some kind of lock on the planet. We don't really discover many of the really sources, no? Mm-hmm. No matter with the technology is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of, that is, and I apply to the story, and I try to make interpretation of these mysteries of archaeology.
It's fascinating.
Why we didn't discover never the Alexander the Great grave? Why never discover the Attila, the Han, the grave? Why we didn't?
Exactly. Look, we have to say goodnight. Thank you so much for being with us. Alex Chionetti, his book, Mysteries of the Taos Caves, The Lost Civilizations Where the Andes Meet the Amazon, Bear & Company, 2019 release.